The challenge coin felt heavier than it should have. Lieutenant Emma Kincaid turned the bronze disc between her fingers, watching overhead lights catch the embossed trident, the eagle, the anchor. Her father's hands had held this same coin 1,000 times. Those hands were ash now, scattered over the Pacific 6 months ago according to his will. She sat alone in the corner booth of the Anchor Bar, 3 blocks from Naval Amphibious Base, Little Creek, Virginia. The booth's red vinyl was cracked and patched with duct tape. The wobbly table had initials carved into its surface going back decades. Someone had etched Hawk 92 deep into the wood near the edge. Her father's handiwork, his nickname, his legacy. Emma was 23 years old, 5 feet 2 inches in boots, and looked like someone's kid sister who had wandered into the wrong establishment. She wore her father's old Bud/S training hoodie, forest green and faded, 3 sizes too large. The fabric still carried a ghost of his scent if she pressed it to her face. Salt water, gun oil, the particular sharp smell of determination that seemed to live in the fibers. Her long auburn hair fell across her face like a curtain she could hide behind. To anyone glancing her way, she appeared lost, maybe waiting for an older boyfriend, maybe someone who should have stayed on campus where she belonged. That was exactly how she wanted it. The Anchor Bar attracted a specific Friday night crowd, military personnel from every branch, contractors with government clearances, veterans who couldn't quite let go of the life. The air smelled like cheap beer and cheaper aftershave. The jukebox played the same rotation of country songs it had been playing since before Emma was born. She wrapped her hands around a glass of ginger ale and waited. Across the bar, sitting on a stool near the far corner, a man in his late 60s nursed a beer with practiced patience. Master Chief Garrett Sullivan wore civilian clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied a paperback. To the casual observer, he was just another retiree killing time on a Friday evening. But Emma knew better. Sullivan had been her father's closest friend for 42 years. They had served together through the Cold War's final decade, through the Persian Gulf, through the long wars that followed. Sullivan had stood beside her father's casket at Arlington. He had handed her the folded flag with hands that trembled despite a lifetime of discipline. And now he sat in this bar, pretending not to watch her, because this was all part of the plan, her father's plan. The letter had arrived 2 weeks after the funeral, delivered by Sullivan himself. Emma had recognized her father's handwriting immediately. Sharp, precise, the letters formed with the same exactness he had applied to everything in his life. Emma, it began, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if Sullivan is handing you this letter at the Anchor Bar, then you've made your choice. You've become what I always knew you would be, the first female SEAL in the Kincaid line, the one who proved that warriors aren't measured by their size, but by the size of their determination. Now comes your real test. Not the ocean, not the desert, not the enemy you can see. The test is the enemy you can't see until it's standing right in front of you, wearing the face of an ally. Prejudice, assumption, the kind of blind certainty that gets good people killed. 32 years ago, I sat in the same booth where you're sitting now. I was 39 years old. I had just returned from the Gulf. I thought I had seen everything, done everything, proved everything. Then a drunk Marine decided I looked like an easy target. He was wrong. What happened next became legend in certain circles. Sullivan was there. He'll tell you the story if you ask. Here's what matters. I turned that Marine into one of the finest tactical instructors in the Corps. I didn't destroy him. I educated him. That's real strength, Emma. Not the ability to hurt, the wisdom to teach. So here's my final gift to you, my final test. Sit in that booth. Look small. Look lost. Look like everything they assume you are. Someone will come. Someone always comes. And when they do, you'll have a choice. My choice. The choice every warrior faces when they realize their power. Destroy or educate. I know which one you'll choose. You're a Kincaid. We don't break our enemies. We show them a better way to be. Sullivan has the details. Trust him. He's earned it 1,000 times over. Make me proud one more time, kid. Your loving father, Admiral James Kincaid. Hawk, always. Emma had read the letter 17 times. She had memorized every word. And now she sat in the booth, her father's challenge coin in her pocket alongside her own, waiting for history to repeat itself. The man who approached fit her father's prediction perfectly. He was massive. 6 feet 4 inches with shoulders that barely cleared standard doorways. His neck was thick enough to suggest either serious dedication to powerlifting or serious dedication to pharmaceutical enhancement. Probably both. An Army Ranger tab was visible on his jacket sleeve, worn like a badge that entitled him to anything he wanted. Staff Sergeant Donovan Thatcher. Van to his friends, according to the conversation Emma had been monitoring for the past 40 minutes. 29 years old, 3 deployments to Afghanistan, currently stationed at Joint Base Langley, Eustis. Drunk enough to be dangerous, sober enough to be convincing. He slid into the booth across from Emma without invitation. Well. His voice was deep and slurred, dripping with the particular confidence that only excessive alcohol could produce. What do we have here? Emma didn't look up immediately. She had learned this technique in intelligence training. Let them think they're in control. Let them commit to the role they've chosen. Give them rope. Hey, Van leaned forward. I'm talking to you, sweetheart. Emma finally raised her eyes. Can I help you? Now that's more like it. Van flashed what he probably thought was a charming smile. I've been watching you sit here all alone, and I thought to myself, that's just criminal. Pretty little thing like you shouldn't be by herself on a Friday night. I'm fine, thank you. Come on, don't be like that. Van's breath carried whiskey fumes, sharp and sour. Let me buy you a real drink. Whatever that is you're sipping looks like something my grandmother would order. It's ginger ale. I don't drink. You don't drink? Van laughed like she had told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. What are you, 12? Come on, one shot won't kill you. Live a little. Emma's voice remained perfectly level. I said no thank you. Something shifted in Van's expression. The playful charm evaporated, replaced by something harder, colder. He wasn't used to rejection, and he definitely wasn't used to rejection from someone who looked like she should be taking notes in a lecture hall rather than sitting in a military bar. What's your problem? His voice dropped lower. You think you're too good for me or something? I don't have a problem. I'm just not interested. Not interested. Van repeated the words like they were a foreign language he couldn't translate. Behind him, Emma could see his friends gathering. Sergeant First Class Burke Mackenzie, a rangy man with a scar across his left eyebrow. Staff Sergeant Wyatt Callahan, broad-shouldered and grinning. Private First Class Trent Russo, young enough to still have acne scars, nervous enough to keep glancing toward the exit. They were watching with the hungry anticipation of men who sensed entertainment coming. Hey, Van, Burke called out. She playing hard to get? Van didn't take his eyes off Emma. Yeah, seems like little princess here thinks she's something special. I never said that. Emma kept her voice calm, though every nerve in her body had begun to hum with the particular awareness that had kept her alive in situations far more dangerous than this. I said I'm not interested. Those are 2 different things. Sounds the same to me. Then you should work on your listening comprehension. The words hung in the air between them. Van's face flushed red, and Emma knew she had made a mistake. She had let her mouth get ahead of her judgment. It was a problem she had struggled with since childhood, this inability to simply accept disrespect in silence. But it was also part of the plan. Her father had known she would provoke them. He had counted on it. What did you just say to me? I think you heard me. Van's hand shot across the table and grabbed Emma's wrist. His grip was crushing, designed to hurt, designed to establish dominance. His fingers dug into her skin with enough force to leave marks that would last for days. Emma felt the bones in her wrist grind together. She could have prevented the grab. She had seen it coming from 3 seconds away, telegraphed in the tightening of his shoulders, the shift of his weight. But preventing it wasn't the plan. Experiencing it was. "Listen here, you little—" "Let go of my arm." "Or what?" Van squeezed harder, and Emma felt cartilage compress. "What exactly are you going to do about it?" The bar had gone quiet. Conversations died mid-sentence as people turned to watch the confrontation unfolding in the corner booth. Some pulled out phones. Others simply stared with the morbid curiosity of bystanders who sensed violence approaching. Emma looked at Van's hand on her wrist, then up at his face. Her expression hadn't changed. Her breathing hadn't quickened. If anything, she seemed almost bored. "You have 3 seconds to let go." Van laughed. 3 seconds? Then what? 2 seconds. "You're going to count down at me? That's adorable. Hey, boys," he called out to his friends without looking away from Emma. "This little girl thinks she's tough, says she's going to do something if I don't let go." The Rangers hooted and hollered, enjoying the show. 1 second. "And what happens at 0, princess? You going to cry? Call your daddy? Maybe." "Time's up." Emma moved so fast that later witnesses would struggle to describe exactly what happened. One moment, Van was holding her wrist with crushing force. The next moment, he was clutching his hand against his chest, gasping in pain, his index and middle fingers bent at angles that fingers were never meant to bend. The technique was called a figure 4 wrist lock with digit manipulation. Emma's father had taught it to her when she was 16. She had practiced it 10,000 times since then. She knew exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly which angle would cause maximum pain with minimum permanent damage. Van stared at his damaged hand in disbelief. "What the? You broke my fingers!" "Dislocated." Emma slid out of the booth and stood. At 5'2", she barely came up to Van's chest. But something in her posture had changed. The shy college girl was gone. In her place stood someone else entirely. "There's a difference. A break would be permanent. This is just educational." "You crazy," Van swung with his good hand. It was a haymaker, telegraphed from a mile away, powered by rage rather than technique. Emma watched it come like she was watching a slow-motion replay. She had all the time in the world to analyze the trajectory, calculate the force, determine the optimal response. She chose not to dodge. The slap connected with her face like a thunderclap. Her head snapped to the side, and she stumbled backward into the booth, catching herself against the worn vinyl. Blood immediately began pooling at the corner of her mouth, where her lip had split against her teeth. The copper taste flooded her tongue. The entire bar held its breath. Van stood over her, chest heaving, his damaged hand still clutched against his body. "That's what you get. That's what happens when you don't know your place, you little—" Emma straightened slowly. She touched her fingertips to her bleeding lip, examined the crimson like a scientist studying a particularly interesting specimen. The blood was bright red, arterial, dripping down her chin to spot the collar of her father's hoodie. Then she looked up at Van with an expression that made him take an involuntary step backward. She was smiling. "Thank you," Emma whispered. "I needed that." "What?" "I said thank you." Emma wiped the blood from her mouth with the back of her hand, leaving a red smear across her skin. "You've given me exactly what I needed." Van's confusion was written across his face in capital letters. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to cry. She was supposed to cower. She was supposed to prove every assumption he had ever made about women and weakness and the natural order of things. Instead, she was thanking him. "You're insane," he said, but his voice had lost its earlier conviction. "You're actually insane." Emma reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out 2 challenge coins. She placed them on the table with deliberate care, the overhead light catching the intricate details etched into their surfaces. The first coin showed a trident, an eagle, an anchor. the insignia of Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DevGRU, the people they didn't talk about on the news, the people who went places that didn't exist to do things that never happen. The second coin was older, worn smooth at the edges from decades of handling. It showed a similar trident, but the date stamped beneath read 1991, and the text said, Desert Storm. "I'm leaving now," Emma said quietly. "But this isn't over, Staff Sergeant Thatcher. Not even close." "How do you know my name?" "Your friend called you Van. The Rangers only give that nickname to one person per battalion. Your unit patch tells me you're with 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. And you've been telling stories about yourself all night, loud enough for everyone in this bar to hear." Emma picked up her purse and slung it over her shoulder. Blood still dripped from her split lip, but she ignored it. "Next time you decide to put your hands on someone you don't know, maybe consider that they might be paying attention to things you don't realize." She walked toward the exit, passing by the bar where Master Chief Garrett Sullivan sat nursing his beer. He was in his late 60s with the weathered look of someone who had seen more than his fair share of trouble. His eyes were fixed on the 2 coins Emma had left behind. "Miss," he called out. "Miss, wait." Emma paused but didn't turn around. "That coin," Sullivan's voice was barely above a whisper. "The new one. Is that what I think it is?" "What do you think it is?" "Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DevGRU, the people they don't talk about on the news." Emma smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Have a good night, Master Chief." She pushed through the door and disappeared into the Virginia Beach night, leaving behind a stunned bar, 2 challenge coins, and a staff sergeant who was just beginning to understand that he had made the worst mistake of his life. Sullivan waited exactly 30 seconds before he stood and walked over to where Van stood frozen, still staring at the door Emma had walked through. The challenge coins sat on the table like accusations. "Son," Sullivan said quietly, "do you have any idea what you just did?" Van turned, his expression a mixture of confusion and wounded pride. "I taught some mouthy little girl a lesson. That's what I did." "No." Sullivan picked up the newer coin and held it up to the light, confirming what he had suspected. "No, that's not what you did at all." "Who the hell are you?" "I'm someone who's been around long enough to recognize trouble when I see it." Sullivan traced the trident on the coin with his thumb. "This isn't a souvenir you pick up at the Navy Exchange. This is earned. And the people who earn it, they don't lose bar fights, son. They don't lose anything." Van's friend Burke pushed through the gathering crowd. "Van, what's going on? Who was that?" "I don't know." Van's voice had lost its confidence. "Some crazy woman who—" "She's not crazy." Sullivan set the coin back on the table. "She's DevGRU, Tier 1, the people who go places that don't exist to do things that never happened." He looked at Van with something that might have been pity. "And you just slapped her in the face in front of 40 witnesses." The color drained from Van's face. "That's impossible. She was tiny. She looked like a kid." "That's how it works, son. The really dangerous ones never look dangerous. It's the ones who have something to prove, who walk around advertising their capabilities." Sullivan glanced at the security camera mounted in the corner of the bar, its red light blinking steadily. "That camera's been recording all night. High definition, full audio. Everything that happened here is now evidence." "Evidence of what?" "Assault on a federal officer. That girl might look like she belongs in a sorority, but legally speaking, you just put your hands on a commissioned member of the United States military's most elite Special Operations Unit." Sullivan shook his head slowly. "I've seen careers ended for less. I've seen prison time handed out for less." Van's damaged hand throbbed, reminding him that the tiny woman had done something to him that he still didn't understand. One moment he had been in control, and the next moment his fingers were bending in directions that made him nauseous to remember. "She attacked me first," he protested weakly. "She broke my fingers." "Dislocated. That's what she said, right? There's a difference." Sullivan turned to leave, then paused. And I guarantee you that camera shows you grabbing her wrist before she did anything. That's aggravated assault, son. She was defending herself. He headed for the door, then stopped one more time. If I were you, I'd start making phone calls. You're going to need a lawyer, probably a good one. Sullivan walked out of the bar, leaving behind the challenge coins and the growing realization that Van's life had just taken a very unexpected turn. Van's friends gathered around him, their earlier amusement replaced by concern. Van, what do we do? Wyatt looked at the coins like they might bite him. If she's really who that guy says she is, she's not. Van grabbed the coins and shoved them in his pocket. She can't be. Navy SEALs are 6-foot walls of muscle. They're not 5-0 girls who look like they should be studying for midterms. But what if she is? Trent's voice cracked. Van couldn't shake the memory of her eyes. The way she had looked at him after the slap, like she was seeing something he couldn't, like she was calculating distances and angles and outcomes that existed several moves ahead of anything he could comprehend. Let's get out of here, he said finally. They pushed through the crowd toward the exit, and Van tried not to notice how people stepped aside to let them pass. Not out of respect like before, out of something that looked uncomfortably like pity. Outside, the Virginia Beach night was cool and damp, carrying the salt smell of the ocean 3 blocks away. Van pulled out his phone and stared at the screen, trying to decide who to call. We should find out who she really is, Burke suggested. If she's military, there will be records. I've got a buddy who works intelligence, Burke said, already typing. Give me her name. I don't know her name. What do you mean you don't know her name? She never told me. Van realized how stupid that sounded. He had been so focused on demonstrating his dominance that he had never thought to learn basic information. But she knew mine. She knew everything about me. Van, that's what surveillance looks like, Burke said, his expression growing more concerned. Van's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Virginia Beach area code. Training exercise scheduled. Building 718, Naval Special Warfare Command. 1900 hours. Tomorrow. Failure to appear will result in formal military police notification of tonight's incident. Lieutenant Kincaid. Van stared at the message, reading it 3 times. She's giving me a choice, he said slowly. Show up for some kind of training thing, or she files charges. That sounds like blackmail. No. Van thought about the way she had thanked him after the slap. It sounds like she had this plan from the beginning. He climbed into his truck, trying to ignore the way his hands were shaking. The bronze challenge coins sat heavy in his pocket, pressing against his thigh like a warning he should have heeded hours ago. But it was too late for warnings now. The clock was ticking toward 1900 hours tomorrow, and Emma Kincaid was waiting. Van didn't sleep that night. At 0400 hours, he gave up entirely and started searching. His laptop screen glowed as he typed Emma Kincaid, Navy SEAL, into Google. The results were useless. Generic articles, statistics, nothing specific. But then Burke's text came through at 0530. Found something. Call me. Van's fingers trembled as he dialed. You're not going to believe this, Burke said. I talked to my buddy in intelligence, showed him the picture I took of that challenge coin. And? He went pale, Van, told me to forget I ever asked, said if I knew what was good for me, I'd pretend tonight never happened. Van's stomach dropped. That's all? No, he said that coin belongs to someone who doesn't officially exist. Someone whose personnel file requires clearance levels he doesn't have and never will. That's impossible. She's 23. My buddy said there was a hostage situation a few years ago. Middle East. American aid workers held by militants. Single operator infiltrated alone. Neutralized 8 hostiles in under 90 seconds. Extracted all 14 hostages. Van felt his mouth go dry. The operator was a woman barely out of her teens. Youngest person to ever complete DevGru selection. They call her the Hawk's Ghost. Van ended the call, his hands shaking. The Hawk's ghost. At 0600 hours, his phone rang with an official naval number. Staff Sergeant Thatcher, this is Commander Patricia Brennan from Naval Special Warfare Command. I'm calling to confirm your participation in tonight's training exercise. Van's throat went dry. I received the message. Outstanding. Report to Building 718 at 1900 hours. Wear appropriate physical training attire. The exercise will involve close quarters combat simulation. What exactly is going to happen? There was a pause. When Brennan spoke again, her voice carried something that sounded almost like sympathy. Staff Sergeant, I'm going to give you some advice. When you walk into that facility tonight, forget everything you think you know about combat. Forget your Ranger training. Forget your deployments. Forget every assumption you've ever made about what strength looks like. Another pause. And pray that Lieutenant Kincaid is in a teaching mood rather than a demonstrating mood. The line went dead. Van sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the phone. His damaged fingers throbbed with each heartbeat. That had been in a bar, with no preparation, with no intention of causing real harm. Tonight would be different. Tonight she would be ready. Across town, Emma Kincaid was finishing her morning workout when Master Chief Garrett Sullivan found her in the base gym. She was on the pull-up bar, executing slow, controlled repetitions. Her split lip had scabbed over during the night, leaving only a thin, dark line. But Sullivan noticed it immediately. Rough night? He asked. Emma dropped from the bar. Productive night? That's not what I heard. Sullivan crossed his arms. Half the command already knows what happened at the Anchor Bar. Good. Saves me the trouble of filing an official report. You're not going to file a report. Why would I? Emma wiped sweat from her face. I have something better planned. Sullivan studied her. He had been her father's closest friend since before Emma was born. He had watched Hawk Kincaid train a generation of warriors, had seen him turn enemies into allies through skill and wisdom. And now he was watching Hawk's daughter prepare to do the same thing. What are you planning, Kincaid? A lesson for the Ranger who hit me, for everyone watching, for every person who's ever looked at me and seen a liability instead of an asset. Emma's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. I'm tired of proving myself quietly, Master Chief. Tonight I'm going to prove something loudly, something that nobody who sees it will ever forget. And the Ranger? He's the teaching example? He volunteered for the position when he put his hands on me. Sullivan nodded slowly. The facility is booked. You've got observers lined up too. Some pretty impressive names on that list. The more witnesses, the more effective the lesson. Emma, Sullivan's voice softened, whatever happens tonight, make sure it's about education and not revenge. Those are two very different things. Emma met his eyes. Master Chief, if I wanted revenge, Staff Sergeant Thatcher wouldn't have walked out of that bar last night. He would have been carried out in pieces. She picked up her gym bag. Tonight isn't about hurting him. It's about teaching him. Teaching all of them that the most dangerous person in any room is usually the one they underestimate the most. She walked out, leaving Sullivan standing alone. He had trained operators for 30 years. He had served alongside Hawk Kincaid through conflicts most people didn't even know had happened. But Emma Kincaid was something else entirely. She had her father's skills, his tactical mind, his ability to see 3 moves ahead, but she also had something Hawk had never possessed, an edge born from a lifetime of being underestimated. God help Staff Sergeant Donovan Thatcher. By 1400 hours, Van had called every contact he could think of. His commanding officer had been sympathetic but unhelpful. You assaulted a federal officer, Thatcher. Be grateful she's offering you an alternative. His JAG contact had been blunt. The video clearly shows you initiating contact. Her response could be argued as self-defense. Your slap is textbook assault. If she files charges, you're looking at minimum reduction in rank, maximum brig time. His Ranger buddy, who had completed joint training with SEALs, had been terrified. DevGru, dude? These aren't regular SEALs. These are the operators who killed bin Laden. If one of them has targeted you for a training exercise, you should seriously consider desertion. By 1600 hours, Van had assembled his backup team. Burke had agreed to participate despite his reservations. Someone needs to watch your back. Wyatt had volunteered because he didn't believe the stories. One woman against 4 Rangers? We'll show these Navy boys what Army looks like. Trent had been voluntold by his commanding officer. Consider this a learning opportunity. At 1800 hours, they loaded into Van's truck and drove toward Naval Special Warfare Command. The base seemed different at night. Security checkpoints scrutinized credentials with suspicious intensity. Armed guards watched their vehicle like it contained potential threats. "Something's different," Burke muttered. "Something's wrong." "It's just nerves," Van said, but his voice lacked conviction. Building 718 loomed at the end of a long access road, a concrete structure with no windows and no external markings. The kind of building that existed on official maps, but was never discussed in official conversations. Van parked and sat for a moment, staring at the entrance. "Last chance to back out," Burke offered. "No," Van opened his door. "I'm not running from a fight, and I'm definitely not running from a girl half my size." They walked toward the entrance as a group. A petty officer met them at the door, his expression neutral, but his eyes carrying something that looked like anticipation. "Staff Sergeant Thatcher, I'm Petty Officer Declan Reynolds. I'll be handling logistics for tonight's exercise." "Where is she?" "Lieutenant Kincaid is completing her preparations. You'll be briefed in the staging area." Reynolds checked his tablet. "Your teammates have all signed the standard liability waivers." "Liability waivers?" "Standard procedure for combat simulation exercises. Covers minor injuries sustained during training activities." Van hadn't read anything. He had been too busy panicking. "Just show us where to go." Reynolds led them through a series of security doors, each requiring increasingly complex credentials. The corridor seemed to stretch forever, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the air growing colder as they descended deeper into the building. "How far underground is this place?" Trent asked nervously. "The multi-environment training facility spans 3 levels below ground," Reynolds answered. "It's designed to simulate various operational environments without external interference or observation. So nobody can see what happens down here? Nobody except the monitoring team, the medical staff, and the command observers." Reynolds stopped at a final door. "This is the staging area. Gear up and wait for the exercise initiation signal." He opened the door and stepped aside. Inside, 4 sets of tactical equipment had been laid out on benches. Protective padding, communication headsets, impact sensors, biometric monitoring devices. Everything looked professional. Everything also looked like it was designed to accurately measure exactly how badly they were about to be hurt. "Gear up," Van told his team. "Whatever happens in there, we stick together. We watch each other's backs." "What if she's actually as good as everyone says?" Trent asked quietly. "She's not. She can't be." Van started strapping on his equipment. "She's 5'2". She weighs maybe 115 pounds. I don't care how much training someone has. Physics doesn't stop applying." "Physics?" Wyatt laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, physics is definitely on our side." A screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying their biometric readings. 4 heart rates, 4 blood pressure measurements, 4 stress indicators, all of them elevated beyond normal ranges. Above the screen, a camera lens glinted in the low light. Someone was watching. The intercom crackled. "Exercise initiation in 15 minutes." Van finished securing his gear and looked at his team. They looked back with expressions ranging from nervous to terrified. "Remember," he said, "she's just one person. We have the numbers. We have the training. We have the size advantage." But even as he spoke, Van couldn't shake the feeling that none of those things were going to matter. Somewhere in this facility, Emma Kincaid was waiting. Somewhere in this facility, the Hawk's ghost was preparing to teach a lesson that 4 Army Rangers would remember for the rest of their lives. 3 floors above, in an observation deck Van didn't know existed, Commander Patricia Brennan watched the biometric feeds with growing interest. Beside her, 7 senior officers had gathered to witness what promised to be an extraordinary demonstration of capability. Kincaid's heart rate is 52 beats per minute, Lieutenant Commander Douglas Hart observed. She's actually more relaxed now than she was during this morning's briefing. That's because she's entering operational mode, Brennan replied. For her, this isn't stressful. This is what she was trained to do. And the Rangers? Hart checked the primary displays. Heart rates averaging 140, elevated cortisol, classic pre-combat stress responses. They're already losing, someone muttered, and they don't even know it yet. The main display showed Emma completing her final equipment check. She moved with fluid efficiency, her expression calm, focused, almost serene. She looked like someone about to teach a class. She looked like exactly what she was. The most dangerous person in the building, preparing to demonstrate why appearances meant absolutely nothing when skill was absolute. On one wall of the observation deck hung a series of photographs. Historical images documenting the evolution of naval special warfare training from the 1960s through the present day. One photograph in particular drew the eye. It showed a training class from 1992, 32 years ago. In the center of the front row stood a man in his late 30s, lean and hard-eyed, wearing the expression of someone who had seen combat and emerged stronger for it. The nameplate beneath the photo read, Lieutenant Commander James Kincaid, Hawk. Next to that photograph hung another image from the same year, the same facility, the same training room they would be using tonight. Hawk Kincaid stood in tactical gear, his hand extended toward a Marine who knelt on the ground in obvious pain. The caption read, Tactical Demonstration, Building 718, November 1992. Master Chief Garrett Sullivan stood beside that second photograph, his hand resting on the frame. He had been there that night. He had watched Hawk Kincaid turn a drunk, prejudiced Marine into one of the finest tactical instructors the Corps had ever produced. Not through destruction, through education. And now, 32 years later, he was about to watch Hawk's daughter do the same thing. She has her father's gift, Sullivan said quietly, the ability to see what someone can become, not just what they are. Her father was a legend, Brennan replied. The question is whether she can live up to that legacy. She's not trying to live up to it, Commander. She's trying to honor it. There's a difference. The intercom crackled again. 5 minutes to exercise initiation. Emma's voice came through the communication system, clear and professional. Control, this is Kincaid. All systems operational, ready to begin. In the staging area, 3 floors below, Van heard her voice and felt something cold settle in his stomach. She sounded bored. She sounded like someone who had already won. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered a warning he should have heeded 24 hours ago. The most dangerous opponent is the one who controls the battlefield before the first shot is fired. Emma Kincaid had been controlling this battlefield since the moment Van decided she looked like an easy target. He just hadn't realized it until now. 2 minutes to exercise initiation. Van closed his eyes and tried to steady his breathing. It didn't work. His heart rate climbed to 160 beats per minute. And in the observation deck, Commander Brennan smiled grimly. It's beginning, she said. The lights died without warning. One moment Van could see his teammates. The next moment he was standing in absolute darkness, his heart slamming against his ribs. Stay calm, he hissed into the comm system. Night vision now. 4 sets of goggles activated simultaneously, transforming the blackness into an eerie green landscape. The training facility stretched before them like a maze designed by someone who understood fear at a molecular level. Corridors branched in multiple directions. Obstacles created shadows within shadows. And somewhere in that labyrinth, Emma Kincaid was waiting. "Control, this is Alpha Team," Van said. "We have visual. Proceeding to primary objective." Reynolds' voice came through their headsets with infuriating calm. "Acknowledged, Alpha Team. Your objective is to retrieve the intelligence package located in the central chamber. Opposition forces active. Exercise clock is running." "Opposition force," Burke muttered. "That's a fancy way of saying one tiny woman who's going to try to murder us." "Stay focused." Van started moving forward. "Callahan, you're on point. Russo, cover our 6. Mackenzie, stay close to me." They advanced through the first corridor in textbook fashion, each man covering his assigned sector, each footstep placed with deliberate care. Their breathing was too loud in the enclosed space. Their heartbeats were even louder. "I don't like this," Trent whispered from the rear. "It's too quiet." "That's because she hasn't engaged yet," Wyatt said. "She's probably watching us right now." In the observation deck, Commander Brennan leaned forward as Emma's position indicator moved on the tactical display. She had been motionless for the first 3 minutes, allowing Van's team to advance deep into the facility. Now she was circling behind them with the patient precision of a predator selecting its first target. "She's going for Russo," Hart observed. "The youngest, the most nervous. She's isolating the weak link." Brennan nodded. "Classic tactics. Remove the most vulnerable target first, then use that disappearance to destabilize the rest of the team." Sullivan stood at the back of the observation deck, arms crossed, watching with an expression that mixed pride and concern. He had seen Hawk Kincaid do this same thing dozens of times. Identify the weakest element, remove it quietly, use the resulting confusion to break down the remaining opposition piece by piece. Emma had learned from the best. Down in the facility, Trent was struggling to control his fear. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made him flinch. He kept glancing over his shoulder, certain that someone was right behind him. He was right. Emma materialized from the darkness like she had been formed from it. One moment, Trent was covering the rear of the formation. The next moment, a hand clamped over his mouth, and he was being pulled backward into a side passage with terrifying speed. He tried to scream. He tried to fight, but Emma's grip was like iron wrapped in silk, and her voice in his ear was calm and professional. "Don't struggle, Private. This will be over in 3 seconds." Trent felt pressure against his neck. Not painful, just pressure in exactly the right spot to make consciousness slip away like water through fingers. The last thing he heard was Emma's voice again, soft and matter-of-fact. "One down." "Russo, report." Van stopped at the next intersection, suddenly aware that he couldn't hear the youngest member of his team. "Russo, what's your status?" Silence. "Mackenzie, when did you last see Russo?" Burke turned, his night vision scanning the corridor behind them. "He was right there. He was right behind me 30 seconds ago." "Well, he's not there now." Wyatt moved back to investigate. "Russo, sound off." Nothing. "She got him." Burke's voice cracked slightly. "She got him without making a sound." "That's impossible. We were in formation." "Then where is he, Van?" Van's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Trent was still a ranger, still trained for exactly this kind of scenario. How had she taken him without any of them noticing? "Control, this is Alpha Team. We've lost contact with one team member. Request status update." Reynolds' voice came back with the same infuriating calm. "Team member Russo has been neutralized. Biometrics show he's unconscious and uninjured. Exercise continues." "Neutralized? What does that mean?" "It means he's out of the exercise, Staff Sergeant. You're down to 3. Van exchanged looks with Burke and Wyatt through their night vision goggles. 3 minutes into the exercise, and they had already lost a quarter of their team. "New plan," Van said. "We stay tight. Nobody more than arm's reach from someone else." "What about the objective?" Wyatt asked. "Forget the objective. Our new objective is surviving long enough to actually see her." They reformed into a tighter group and continued advancing, but the confidence was gone. Every step felt like walking deeper into a trap. Wyatt was next. He had been Army for 11 years, 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Iraq. Ranger qualified, Airborne qualified, Air Assault qualified. He had survived firefights that killed better men. None of that prepared him for Emma Kincaid. She came from above. Wyatt never knew how she had gotten up there. The facility had maintenance access points, narrow passages designed for repairs. Emma had used them to reposition vertically while Van's team focused on horizontal threats. One moment, Wyatt was scanning the corridor ahead. The next moment, something hit him from directly overhead, driving him to the ground with precise, controlled force. His weapon went flying. His night vision goggles were knocked askew. "Don't fight it, Sergeant," Emma whispered. "This is a lesson, not a punishment." Wyatt tried to grab her, tried to use his superior size and strength, but she had positioned herself perfectly, using leverage and anatomy to neutralize every physical advantage he possessed. His vision started to blur. His arms stopped responding. Then darkness. Van heard Wyatt hit the ground and spun toward the sound, weapon raised. He saw nothing. "Callahan!" Burke was already moving toward the sound. "Callahan, respond." "Don't!" Van grabbed Burke's arm. "Don't separate, that's what she wants." She just took Callahan. "And if you go after him alone, you'll be next." Van pulled Burke back. "Stay with me." "Control, we've lost Callahan." Van's voice was barely controlled now. "Request immediate extraction." "Negative, Alpha Team. Exercise continues until completion or voluntary surrender." "Surrender?" Burke's laugh was high and desperate. "We're surrendering to a woman half our size?" "We're not surrendering to anyone." Van's grip tightened on his weapon. "She has to show herself eventually. You said she couldn't take Russo without us noticing. You said we'd see her coming for Callahan." Burke's weapon trembled. "Everything you've said has been wrong." Van didn't have an answer. The seconds stretched into minutes. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound seemed to signal approaching danger. The waiting was worse than any combat Van had ever experienced. Then Emma's voice echoed through the facility, calm and clear, and somehow coming from everywhere at once. "Staff Sergeant Thatcher, I think it's time we talked." Van spun toward the sound, weapon raised. "Show yourself." "Why would I do that? You still have weapons. You still think you have a chance." "We do have a chance." "Is that what you see?" Emma's voice carried a note of amusement. "Let me offer a different perspective. Your team started with 4 trained Rangers, combined combat experience of over 20 years. Every tactical advantage you could ask for." She paused. "And in 8 minutes I've reduced you to 2 terrified men hiding in a corner. Too scared to advance. Too scared to retreat. Waiting for me to decide when the lesson ends." Burke's breathing had become rapid and shallow. "She's trying to get in our heads." "Is it working?" Emma asked pleasantly. "No." "Then why is your heart rate at 182, Sergeant Mackenzie? Why have your hands been shaking for the last 4 minutes?" Burke looked down at his hands. They were shaking exactly as Emma had described. "How do you know my name?" "I know everything about you, Sergeant. I've been watching you all night, learning your patterns, understanding your weaknesses." A pause. "I did the same thing at the bar last night. Did you notice?" "No, you were too busy assuming you had nothing to worry about." "Show yourself." "If you insist." Emma stepped into view at the end of the corridor. She was alone, unarmed, standing in the open with no cover, no concealment. In the green glow of their night vision, she looked impossibly small, impossibly vulnerable. Van's finger found the trigger. "Don't move." "I'm not going to move, Staff Sergeant. I'm going to stand here and give you exactly what you wanted." Emma's voice remained calm. "You have weapons. I don't. You have a teammate. I'm alone. You have clear lines of fire. She spread her arms. This is your chance. Take it. Burke's weapon steadied. She's right there. We can end this. Wait. Something was wrong. Van could feel it. This is too easy. Too easy? Van, she's giving herself to us. No. Van lowered his weapon slightly. She's not giving herself to us. She's testing us. Emma smiled. The same smile she had given him after he slapped her. Very good, Staff Sergeant. You're learning. Learning what? That the moment you thought you had control was the moment you lost everything. Emma took a step forward. You could have shot me just now. The impact sensors would have registered hits. The exercise would have ended. So why didn't we? Because somewhere in your mind, you understood the truth. If I'm standing in the open with no protection, it's because I've already calculated every possible outcome. Another step forward. It's because this was never a fight. It was a lesson. And the lesson isn't over yet. Van raised his weapon again. Stay back. Or what? You'll shoot me? We've already established you had your chance. Emma continued walking forward with the unhurried pace of someone who had all the time in the world. Your hesitation tells me everything. You're not soldiers right now. You're students. And class is still in session. She was 20 feet away, then 15, then 10. Burke's nerve broke first. He lunged forward, attempting to tackle her. It was a desperate move, powered by fear and the overwhelming need to do something. It was like watching someone try to catch smoke. Emma sidestepped his rush with a simple pivot, redirected his momentum with a subtle shift of her weight, and guided him into the wall beside her, with just enough force to stun, but not injure. Before Burke could recover, her hand found a pressure point. His eyes went wide, then slowly closed as consciousness slipped away. Van stood alone. Your turn, Staff Sergeant. Emma turned to face him. Unless you'd like to surrender now and save us both some time. I'm not surrendering to you. No? Emma tilted her head. Why not? Your entire team is neutralized. You've seen what I can do. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish? I'm hoping to land one hit. Van set his weapon aside and raised his fists. Just one. Something to prove that you're not invincible. I'm not invincible, Staff Sergeant. I'm trained. There's a difference. Emma mirrored his stance. If you want to try, I won't stop you. Van swung. It was a good punch, technically sound, properly executed. He put his full weight behind it. Emma wasn't there when it arrived. She had moved. Not far, just enough. Just the precise distance needed to make his fist pass through empty air while positioning herself for a response. Her counter wasn't a punch or a kick. It was something simpler. A joint manipulation applied to his extended arm that sent white-hot pains screaming through his shoulder and dropped him to his knees. That's one, Emma said calmly. Would you like to try again? Van tried to rise, tried to swing with his other hand. Emma responded to each attempt with the same precise efficiency. A pressure point here, a leverage technique there. Nothing that would cause permanent damage. Everything designed to educate rather than destroy. Within 60 seconds, Van was on the ground, unable to move, staring up at the woman who had dismantled 4 Army Rangers like they were children playing soldier. The exercise is over, Emma announced to the monitoring systems. All opposition force members neutralized. No permanent injuries, no excessive force. Then she crouched beside Van, close enough that he could see the faint scar on her lip where he had slapped her the night before. Do you understand now, Staff Sergeant? Do you understand what you actually slapped in that bar? Van's voice came out as barely a whisper. What are you? I'm a lieutenant in the United States Navy. I'm a graduate of the most demanding military training program on Earth. I'm someone who has done things in service to this country that you will never know about and could never understand. Emma's voice remained calm, almost gentle. And I'm the woman you thought was an easy target because I was small and quiet and didn't fight back immediately. Why didn't you fight back? I mean, last night. Because last night I had a choice. I could have responded with immediate violence. I could have hurt you badly enough that you would have spent months in a hospital. Emma stood. Instead, I chose this, a controlled environment, documented proceedings, a lesson that would be remembered not just by you, but by everyone who witnessed it. A lesson about what? Emma looked down at him with an expression that carried no anger, no resentment, only the calm authority of someone who had proven a point beyond any possible dispute. A lesson about underestimating people, Staff Sergeant. A lesson about assumptions. A lesson about the difference between appearance and capability. She offered him her hand. Class is dismissed, but I expect you to remember what you learned here today. Van stared at her hand for a long moment. Then slowly, he reached up and let her help him to his feet. Van's legs wouldn't stop shaking. He stood in the facility's debrief room, surrounded by his teammates who had regained consciousness one by one, each wearing the same expression of stunned disbelief. Trent kept touching his neck. Wyatt stared at the wall. Burke hadn't spoken a single word since waking up, and Emma Kincaid sat across the conference table from them, completely composed. Her uniform showed no signs of the physical activity that had systematically dismantled 4 trained Army Rangers in under 15 minutes. Let's begin with basic outcomes, Commander Brennan announced from the head of the table. All participants completed the exercise without permanent injury. All training objectives were achieved within established safety parameters. Training objectives? Van's voice came out rougher than he intended. What exactly were the training objectives? Brennan consulted her tablet. The stated objective was to demonstrate advanced close-quarters combat techniques in a controlled environment. The practical objective was to provide educational experience for all participants regarding capability assessment and threat evaluation. In other words, Burke finally spoke, his voice flat, the objective was to teach us that we're not as tough as we thought we were. The objective was to teach you that assumptions can be dangerous, Sergeant Mackenzie. Emma's voice remained calm and professional. You assumed that because I was small and female and young, I represented a minimal threat. That assumption nearly cost you in a training environment. In an operational environment, it would have cost you your life. Trent raised his hand like a student in a classroom. Ma'am, how did you take me out? I never even saw you. You weren't supposed to see me, Private. That's the point. Emma turned to face him directly. You were covering the rear of your formation, but you were doing it mechanically. Your attention was focused on a specific arc. I timed my approach to coincide with the gaps in your awareness. But I was trained for this. You were trained for conventional threats. I was trained to be unconventional. Emma's tone carried no condescension, only patient authority. The techniques I use tonight aren't secret. They're applications of principles that any special operations manual will cover. The difference is in execution, in the 10,000 hours of practice, in the willingness to perfect fundamentals until they become instinct. Wyatt leaned forward. The ceiling approach. How did you get above me? The facility has maintenance access points throughout the structure. While your team was focused on horizontal threats, I repositioned vertically. Basic three-dimensional thinking, but most people are conditioned to process tactical environments in 2 dimensions. I've been in the Army for 11 years, Wyatt said slowly. I've survived deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, and a 23-year-old just used 3-dimensional thinking to drop me like a sack of potatoes. Age doesn't determine capability, Sergeant Callahan. Training does. Experience does. The willingness to push beyond conventional limitations does. Emma paused. I started my training when I was 17. I've spent every day since learning how to do exactly what I demonstrated tonight. Commander Brennan interrupted. Staff Sergeant Thatcher, I believe you have something you'd like to say. Van looked up from the table where he had been studying his hands. His damaged fingers from the night before still ached. I owe you an apology, he said quietly, for last night, for what I said. for what I did. Go on. I made assumptions about you based on how you looked. I thought because you were small and quiet, you were weak. I thought because you didn't fight back immediately, you couldn't fight back at all. Van's voice cracked slightly. I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. Emma studied his face, assessing whether his words were genuine. Van met her gaze without flinching. What specifically were you wrong about, Staff Sergeant? I was wrong to think that strength looks a certain way. I was wrong to assume that restraint means inability. I was wrong to believe that my size and training made me superior to someone I'd never even bothered to understand. Van took a deep breath. I was raised to believe that real warriors look like me, talk like me, act like me. Tonight showed me that real warriors can look like anything, act like anything, be anyone. And what are you going to do with that understanding? The question hung in the air. Everyone in the room knew that Van's answer would determine the trajectory of his entire career. I'm going to change, Van said finally. Not because you're forcing me to, not because I'm afraid of what you might do, but because you showed me something tonight that I needed to see. You showed me what real capability looks like, and it doesn't look anything like what I thought. Emma nodded slowly. That's a good start, Staff Sergeant, but understanding is only the first step. The question is whether you're willing to do the work to become something better than what you were. I am. Prove it, Van blinked. How? Emma reached into her pocket and produced 2 challenge coins. She placed them on the table between them. The overhead light caught the details etched into their surfaces. One showed the current DevGru Trident. The other showed an older version, worn smooth at the edges, dated 1991. There's a program at Joint Special Operations Command, Emma said. Cross-training initiative designed to expose conventional forces to advanced tactical methodologies. The selection process is competitive. The training is brutal. The washout rate is over 70%. She pushed both coins toward Van. I'm recommending you for consideration. The room went silent. Burke found his voice first. You're recommending him? After what he did to you? I'm recommending him because of what he showed me tonight. Emma's eyes never left Van's face. He could have surrendered when he realized he couldn't win. Instead, he stood and fought. He could have made excuses or blamed his teammates. Instead, he took responsibility. He could have let his pride prevent him from acknowledging the truth. Instead, he admitted he was wrong. She stood. Those are qualities that matter, Sergeant Mackenzie. Those are qualities that can be developed into something valuable. Emma looked at each of the 4 Rangers in turn. Staff Sergeant Thatcher made a terrible mistake last night, but mistakes can be corrected. Character flaws can be addressed. Potential can be cultivated. She focused back on Van. I see potential. The question is whether he's willing to earn the right to fulfill it. Van picked up the challenge coins and felt their weight in his palm. 24 hours ago, he had seen the first coin as evidence of his victim's pretension. Now he understood it for what it really was. Proof of accomplishment he couldn't begin to comprehend. Why? He asked quietly. Why would you help me after everything I did? Emma's answer cut through the room like a blade. Because hurting you would have been easy. Teaching you is harder. And I've never been interested in doing things the easy way. The formal debrief concluded 30 minutes later. Commander Brennan dismissed the participants with instructions to report for follow-up medical evaluation in the morning. But she asked Emma to remain behind. When the door closed and they were alone, Brennan set down her tablet and studied the young woman who had just delivered one of the most impressive tactical demonstrations she had ever witnessed. That was quite a performance, Lieutenant. It wasn't a performance, ma'am. It was a lesson. The distinction being, a performance is about entertainment. A lesson is about education. Emma remained at attention. Everything that happened tonight was designed to teach specific principles. The observers learned what DevGru capabilities look like in practice. The participants learned what happens when you underestimate an opponent. The documentation will serve as training material for future personnel. Brennan nodded slowly. And what about you? What did you learn? The question seemed to catch Emma off guard. For the first time since the evening began, her composed expression flickered with something more personal. I learned that I'm still angry, she admitted, about last night, about every time someone has looked at me and seen a liability instead of an asset, about every assumption that's ever been made about my capabilities. That anger showed tonight. No, ma'am, Emma's voice steadied. That's what I learned. I was angry, but I didn't let the anger control my decisions. I had every opportunity to hurt Staff Sergeant Thatcher badly. I chose not to, because hurting him wouldn't have accomplished anything meaningful. She paused. Master Chief Sullivan always told me that the mark of a true professional is the ability to separate emotion from execution. Tonight proved I could do that. Master Chief Sullivan is a wise man. He taught me everything I know about being more than just a weapon. Brennan was quiet for a moment, considering her next words carefully. Emma, what you did tonight will be talked about for years. The video of your exercise will be studied at war colleges. The tactical analysis will become required reading for special operations candidates. She paused. But I need to know that you did this for the right reasons. Not revenge, not proving something to yourself, not personal satisfaction. Emma met her commander's eyes without hesitation. I did it because someone needed to. Because every woman who serves in this military deserves to know that capability matters more than appearance. Because every man who thinks he can put his hands on someone he perceives as weak deserves to learn how wrong that assumption can be. Her voice carried quiet conviction. And yes, ma'am, I did it because Staff Sergeant Thatcher hit me, and I wanted him to understand what a mistake that was. I'm not going to pretend I'm above feeling satisfaction about how tonight went. At least you're honest. I try to be, ma'am. Brennan stood and extended her hand. Lieutenant Kincaid, you've represented your unit and your community with distinction. Whatever happens next with Thatcher and his career, you've demonstrated something important tonight, something that will matter long after the bruises fade. Emma shook her commander's hand. Thank you, ma'am. One more thing. Brennan's grip tightened slightly. That recommendation for Thatcher, did you mean it? Every word. Why, honestly? Emma considered the question. Because he reminded me of someone, ma'am. Not the anger or the prejudice, but the potential underneath. The willingness to learn once his assumptions were stripped away. She released Brennan's hand. Someone took a chance on me once. A 17-year-old girl who thought she had something to prove. They could have dismissed me as too young, too small, too female for this life. Instead, they saw something worth developing. And you see that in Thatcher? I see the possibility of it. Whether he actually develops it is up to him. Brennan nodded. Dismissed, Lieutenant. Get some rest. You've earned it. Emma left the conference room and walked through the quiet corridors of Building 718, her footsteps echoing in the empty spaces. The adrenaline that had carried her through the exercise was finally beginning to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. She found Van waiting outside the main entrance, alone in the Virginia Beach night. Lieutenant Kincaid, he straightened when he saw her approach. I thought you'd already left. I had a debrief with Commander Brennan. Emma stopped a few feet away from him. What are you still doing here? I wanted to say something without the audience. Go ahead. Van took a deep breath. In the facility, you said you had a choice. Last night at the bar, you said you could have hurt me badly enough to put me in a hospital. That's correct. But you didn't, even though I deserved it. Even though nobody would have blamed you. Van's voice was raw. Why? Why choose the harder path when the easier one would have been completely justified? Emma was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. The question cut to the heart of everything she believed about power and responsibility. When I was 19, she said finally, I was part of a rescue operation in the Middle East. 14 American aid workers held by a militant cell. The details are classified, but I can tell you that I did things during that mission that I'll never be able to talk about. Things that were necessary, but not something I'm proud of. What does that have to do with last night? Everything. Emma's voice softened. When you're trained the way I was trained, you develop capabilities that most people can't imagine. You learn how to hurt people, how to kill people, how to do things that would give normal people nightmares. She paused. But the training also teaches you something else. It teaches you that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. It teaches you that the measure of a warrior isn't how much damage they can inflict, but how much control they have over their own power. Van listened in silence. Last night when you slapped me, every instinct I developed through years of training screamed at me to respond with immediate violence, to demonstrate exactly how badly you had miscalculated. Emma met his eyes. I didn't do that because my training also includes knowing when violence is necessary and when it isn't. You weren't a terrorist threatening innocent lives. You were a drunk with an ego problem. Responding to you with the same force I'd use against an actual enemy would have made me no better than you were in that moment. So you chose this instead, the training exercise, the lesson. I chose to channel my anger into something productive, something that would actually teach rather than simply punish. Emma paused. And yes, Staff Sergeant, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't satisfaction in watching you realize how wrong you were. But satisfaction wasn't the point. Education was. Van was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a humility that hadn't been there 24 hours ago. I've spent my whole career thinking I was one of the tough guys, thinking that my size and training made me special, made me better than people who didn't look like warriors were supposed to look. He shook his head slowly. Tonight showed me that everything I believed about strength and weakness was wrong. I'm not the toughest person you've ever met, Staff Sergeant. I'm just the one who taught you a lesson you needed to learn. Emma almost smiled. Take the recommendation seriously. The joint program isn't easy, but it will make you better, stronger, more capable, the kind of soldier who doesn't need to prove his worth by diminishing others. And what about you? What happens next for you? I go back to work tomorrow. Same job, same mission. Emma's voice carried quiet finality. Tonight was an interruption. An educational interruption, but an interruption nonetheless. My real work is waiting. Van nodded slowly. If I make it through the program, if I become something better than what I was, will you remember this conversation? I'll remember everything about the last 24 hours, Staff Sergeant. I'll remember what you did at the bar. I'll remember what I taught you in the facility. And I'll remember this moment when you stood here and asked me to believe you could change. Do you believe it? Emma studied his face one last time, reading the uncertainty and the hope and the genuine desire to become something better. I believe you have the potential to change. Whether you actually do is up to you. She turned to walk toward her car. Lieutenant Kincaid. Emma paused but didn't turn around. Thank you, Van said quietly, for the lesson, for the recommendation, for not destroying me when you had every right to. Don't thank me yet, Staff Sergeant. The hard part hasn't even started. Pay it forward. That's how this works. She walked into the Virginia Beach night without looking back, leaving Van standing alone with both challenge coins clutched in his hand. The bronze felt warm against his palm, and the trident emblems seemed to pulse with meaning he was only beginning to understand. 6 months changed everything. Van stood at attention in the graduation ceremony of the Joint Special Operations Advanced Training Program, his body 20 pounds lighter and his mind completely transformed. The man who had slapped a woman in a Virginia Beach bar no longer existed. In his place stood someone who had earned every scar, every callus, every ounce of respect the program demanded. The graduation speaker finished his remarks, and the assembled candidates began receiving their certificates. Van waited for his name, his heart pounding with a mixture of pride and something else. Something that felt like the beginning of a debt being repaid. Staff Sergeant Donovan Thatcher. He stepped forward and accepted his certificate from Colonel Sterling Whitmore, the program director who had nearly washed him out 4 separate times during the brutal 18-week course. "Congratulations, Staff Sergeant." Whitmore's handshake was firm. "Your recommending officer must have seen something special in you. I'm glad you proved her right." "Thank you, sir. I had a lot to prove." "You did, and you did it." Whitmore leaned closer, his voice dropping. "She's here, you know. Back row. Been watching the whole ceremony." Van's breath caught. He hadn't seen Emma since that night outside Building 718, when she had walked away without looking back. 6 months of wondering whether she remembered him. 6 months of pushing through pain and exhaustion and self-doubt, driven by the memory of what she had taught him and the promise he had made to become better. He found her in the crowd as he returned to his seat. She was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a simple jacket, and she looked exactly as she had the first time he saw her. Small, quiet, completely unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what she was capable of. Their eyes met across the room, and Emma gave him the smallest nod of acknowledgement. It was enough. After the ceremony, Van pushed through the crowd of celebrating graduates and their families. His own parents had flown in from Montana, and they were waiting near the refreshment table. But he needed to do something else first. Emma was standing alone near the exit when he found her, as if she had been waiting for him to come. "Lieutenant Kincaid." "Staff Sergeant Thatcher, congratulations on your graduation." "I wouldn't be here without you." "That's not true. The recommendation got you in the door. Everything after that was you." Van shook his head. "No, I mean, I literally wouldn't be here. Not just in this program, here in this version of myself." He struggled to find the right words. "Before that night, I was heading towards something bad. The drinking, the anger, the need to prove myself by tearing other people down. If you hadn't stopped me..." "I didn't stop you, Staff Sergeant. I redirected you. There's a difference. Whatever you call it, you saved me from myself." Van reached into his pocket and pulled out the 2 challenge coins she had left at the bar 6 months ago. Both of them. The Desert Storm coin and her own DevGru coin. "I've carried these every day since. Whenever I wanted to quit, whenever I thought I couldn't push any harder, I looked at them and remembered what you showed me." Emma studied the coins in his palm. Both were worn now, the Desert Storm coin especially so, its edges smooth from months of handling. "What did I show you, Staff Sergeant? That real strength isn't about size or aggression or making other people feel small. It's about control, discipline, the choice to build instead of destroy." Van's voice cracked slightly. "You could have destroyed me that night. You chose to build me up instead. I've spent 6 months trying to be worthy of that choice." Emma was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried something that sounded almost like pride. "You've changed completely. Not just your body. Your eyes are different. The way you carry yourself." She tilted her head, assessing him with the same professional attention she had given him in the training facility. "You're not the same man who grabbed my wrist in that bar." "No, ma'am, I'm not." "Good." Emma reached out and closed his fingers around the challenge coins. "Keep them. You've earned the right to carry them now." "I haven't earned anything. Not compared to what you've accomplished." "Earning isn't about comparison, Staff Sergeant. It's about growth. 6 months ago, you were someone I had to teach a lesson. Today, you're someone I'd be proud to serve alongside." Emma smiled, the first genuine smile he had ever seen from her. "That's not nothing. That's everything." Van felt his eyes stinging and blinked rapidly. Rangers didn't cry. But Rangers also didn't get second chances from people they had wronged. "What happens now?" he asked. "For you, I mean, what's next?" "Same as always. The work continues. New missions, new challenges." Emma glanced toward the door. "There's always someone who needs to learn what you learned. I just hope most of them figure it out without requiring a training facility demonstration. If they don't, you'll be there to teach them." "That's the job, Staff Sergeant." Emma extended her hand. Take care of yourself and take care of the people under your command. Show them that strength comes in forms they might not expect. Van shook her hand, holding on for just a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, Lieutenant Kincaid, for everything. She released his hand and walked out the door without looking back, just like she had 6 months ago, just like she probably always would. Van watched her go, the challenge coins warm in his palm, and felt something shift in his chest. Not closure exactly, more like the beginning of a new chapter. He had spent his whole life believing that warriors looked a certain way, talked a certain way, acted a certain way. Emma Kincaid had taught him that warriors could look like anything, and he intended to spend the rest of his career proving he had learned the lesson. 4 months later, Emma returned to the Anchor Bar on a cool evening in early spring. She hadn't planned to come back. The memories associated with it were complicated. Not traumatic exactly, but loaded with significance she wasn't sure she wanted to revisit. But her car seemed to have other ideas, and before she fully processed what she was doing, she was parking in the same lot where Van had waited for her almost a year ago. The bar hadn't changed, same neon signs, same worn leather seats, same jukebox playing the same rotation of country songs. Tommy, the bartender, was still behind the counter, his weathered face creasing into a smile when he saw her walk through the door. Well, well, the legend returns. I'm not a legend, Tommy, just someone who drinks ginger ale. After what happened in my bar, after what you did to that army boy and his friends? Tommy shook his head. Honey, you're a legend whether you like it or not. Emma slid onto a bar stool. I hope you're not giving tours. Wouldn't dream of it, but I did frame this. Tommy reached under the counter and produced a photograph in a cheap wooden frame. It showed 2 challenge coins lying on a bar surface, the trident emblems clearly visible. Hope you don't mind. I took the picture before that Master Chief friend of yours explained what the coins meant. What do you do with it? I show it to anyone who starts getting too aggressive in my bar. Tell them the story of what happened to the last guy who thought he could put his hands on a woman without consequences. Tommy grinned. Works better than any bouncer I've ever hired. Emma almost laughed. I suppose that's one form of education. Best kind. Prevention through reputation. Tommy poured her a ginger ale without being asked. So what brings you back? I had some leave time and nowhere particular to go. Emma accepted the drink. This seemed as good a place as any. I heard stories about what happened after that night, the training exercise, the video that became required watching, that army boy who changed his whole life because of what you taught him. Van Thatcher is a good soldier now. He's doing important work. Because you gave him the chance to become something better. Tommy's voice softened. Not everyone would have done that. Redemption isn't something you give someone, Tommy. It's something they earn. I just provided the opportunity. Emma sipped her ginger ale and let the familiar sounds of the bar wash over her. Conversations, laughter, the clink of glasses, normal sounds, safe sounds. Then she heard something else, a voice, male, loud, coming from a booth near the back. I said, give me your number, what's the problem? Emma turned slowly. A man in his late 20s, military build, clearly intoxicated. A woman in her mid-20s pressed against the wall of the booth, her body language screaming discomfort. 2 of the man's friends watching with hungry amusement. Emma set down her drink and stood. Honey, Tommy said quietly, you don't have to. This won't take long. She walked toward the booth, not aggressive, not threatening, just purposeful. The man didn't notice her approach until she was standing directly beside his table. When he looked up, his expression shifted from annoyed to dismissive. Another small woman, another obstacle that didn't matter. Mind your own business, he said. She clearly wants you to leave her alone. The man stood, using his height to intimidate. It didn't work. You need to walk away, little girl. Emma's voice was quiet. The last man who tried to intimidate a woman in this bar is still telling people about what happened to him. The man hesitated, something in her posture making every instinct tell him to be careful. "What are you, some kind of cop?" "Something like that." Emma stepped closer. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to this young woman. Then you're going to pay your tab and leave." "Or what?" "Or I'll demonstrate what happens to people who ignore polite requests. And trust me, you don't want that demonstration." The man's face went pale. He didn't understand how she had gotten so close so fast. Didn't understand why every instinct was suddenly screaming, danger. But he understood enough to know she wasn't bluffing. "Fine," he stepped back. "Whatever." The apology. The man looked at the young woman, then back at Emma. Whatever he saw in her eyes convinced him that arguing wasn't worth it. "Sorry," he muttered. "Better." Emma stepped aside to let him pass. "Don't come back until you've learned how to treat people with respect." The man and his friends filed out, leaving behind half-finished drinks. The young woman sat frozen. Emma slid into the seat across from her. "Are you okay?" Yes, thank you. I didn't know what to do." They never do until someone makes them. Emma signaled to Tommy for water. "Do you have someone you can call?" "My roommate, she's close." "Call her. Wait here until she arrives." Emma set the water in front of her. "And next time someone doesn't respect your boundaries, don't be afraid to make a scene. Your safety is more important than their feelings." "How did you do that?" Emma considered the question. "I've spent my life learning to make violence unnecessary. When someone understands their behavior will have consequences they can't handle, most of them choose to stop. And the ones who don't? Then they learn the hard way." The young woman's eyes widened. "That was you. The story Tommy tells." Emma stood. "Your roommate should be here soon. Take care of yourself." She walked back to the bar where Tommy was waiting. "That never gets old," he said. "Watching you work." "It's not work, Tommy. It's just life." Emma accepted the drink. There will always be people who think they can take what they want from others. And there will always be people who stop them. Emma finished her drink and set money on the bar. Then she picked up her challenge coin and walked toward the door. "You coming back?" Tommy called after her. Emma paused at the threshold, the booth where Van had grabbed her wrist, the spot where she had left her coins, the place where a slap had become a lesson, and a lesson had become a legacy. "Probably not," she said. "I've got work to do." "Then give 'em hell, Lieutenant." Emma smiled. "I always do." She walked out into the Virginia Beach night. Somewhere across the country, Van was teaching a class about respect. Somewhere across the world, operators were studying her techniques. But Emma wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about the next mission, the next challenge, the next person who needed to learn that strength came in forms the world didn't expect. Emma Kincaid walked into the darkness, and the darkness made room. Some truths, after all, were eternal.